Could you see the Chargers firing Brandon Staley during the season?
I think a normal team would. I think a normal team would have fired him after he blew that huge lead against the Jaguars in the playoffs. Now, I've been calling for much of the season the Chargers the best dysfunctional team in the NFL because they're clearly dysfunctional. But of all the dysfunctional teams, they've got a franchise quarterback and they've managed to win a few games. But it really is inexcusable when you think about all the injuries to the quarterbacks in the AFC this year, that the Chargers didn't make a run, that they weren't in contention with all these guys dropping like flies, and the Chargers with Justin Herbert can't figure out how to consistently win. So I think a normal team would fire Brandon Staley today. Whether or not Chargers owner Dean Spanos is going to pull the plug on the final 3 games of the season, give Kellen Moore a little bit of a tryout, something to think about as he looks for a new head coach. Although I think they need to, after last night, Dan, I think they need to hit the reset button. There's a cultural issue there. You had guys quitting on the team, and you're going to have guys in that locker room giving the side eye to the ones who quit, the guys who tried versus the ones who didn't. And the new coach, first order of business, is going to be fix that, because you're going to have guys still under contract next year, some of whom tried and some of whom didn't. And now you've got to deal with that on top of everything else going forward.
It feels like we look at the Chargers and we go, boy, those are great uniforms. Like nobody looks better at losing than the Chargers do because of their uniforms. It's like a weird phenomenon. I don't know if there's any other team in any other sport where you go, they're not very good, or they always lose big games. Like the criticism is nowhere near probably where it should be for the Chargers. Why is that?
I don't know, but you're right. They just kind of float around and nobody ever really expects anything from them, just to look good in their uniforms. As long as you look good in your uniforms, it's okay if you're at 500. It's okay if you don't make it to the playoffs. It's okay if you're 1-out. There isn't that passionate, loud fan base that other teams have that are demanding change. And maybe they're just gaslit by the fact that ownership isn't going to come in and make big changes. I mean, really, you think about last year. They could have fired Brandon Staley and hired Sean Payton and kept him away from Denver. And how much better would the Chargers be this year? Look at what Payton's done with Russell Wilson. Remember all that stuff he said to Jarrett Bell of USA Today, and he got dragged for it? I don't think he meant to be on the record, but hey, he was on the record. He said it. And here we are in mid-December, and he was right about everything he said. About the Broncos, about Nathaniel Hackett, about the Jets. He was right about all of it. And look at where the Broncos are, 1 game behind the Chiefs for the division lead, and they could still win the AFC West. It's amazing. And the Chargers could have had him. Because I think between the two jobs, I don't know this, but all things equal, I think Payton takes the Chargers job because of Justin Herbert. It's an attractive job.
Let me go back to the report by Tom Curran, because it was kind of a strange report by Tom Curran, because he didn't even do it on his own social media. Boston Globe didn't pick it up. ESPN didn't pick it up. It was reported that a decision had been made on Bill Belichick when they got back from Germany, when they lost there. It just didn't catch on. So I'm curious why it didn't. And do you think that the Patriots have already told Bill what their decision is?
Well, let me tell you where it did catch on. It caught on at ProFootballTalk.com because it was by far our most visited story of the week. It contributed on Wednesday. It was our biggest traffic day since the day Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles tendon. So it caught fire. But what you're speaking to, Dan, is this wasn't something Tom Curran wrote for NBCSportsBoston.com. He was on some other show and he just said it. And I talked to Tom about it before I wrote anything because I wanted to make sure I was getting it accurately, because I saw someone aggregated and then re-aggregated. It's like, let me just make sure I get this right. And Tom said, yeah, sometimes you write something and you say something and maybe what you said you wouldn't have written, but what you said is true, and it's true. So I think the truth is this. Decision made preliminarily, not implemented yet. Could have been implemented at any point between then and now. Maybe after the Giants game, it could have been implemented. I think right now, riding the victory that they had last Thursday night in Pittsburgh, if they would beat the Chiefs on Sunday, if they build some momentum down the stretch, maybe that decision changes. Nothing's final until it's final. And I also think, Dan, the other wrinkle here is Robert Kraft would like to land the plane in a way that lets him have his cake and eat it too. Move on from Bill Belichick, but get a draft pick or two from the next team that hires him. If I'm Belichick, why am I going along with that? Why am I agreeing to an outcome that causes my next team to give up draft capital to get me. I dig in my heels and I say, look, either bring me back next year and pay me $20 million plus, or you fire me. I'm not going along with this deal. And if there's any deal to be made, it would be this. He walks away free and clear. The Patriots owe him nothing for next year if he doesn't coach, and he can go to a new team unencumbered by any expectation that the Patriots get something in return. That needs to go. They need to set that aside and just let Belichick go wherever he wants to go.
We had Nick Wright on. He works for Fox Sports 1. He's the Chiefs apologist. And he was saying that you had Kadarius Toney lining up offsides numerous times in that game, but they decided to call that play offsides. Now, I should have done a better job and say, well, why do you think they called it in that moment and they didn't call it the other times? But it's almost like the Chiefs are acting like victims here. And why do you think the NFL singled out that play and didn't single out the other ones that Toney was offsides on?
I don't know why, Dan. And look, I don't believe there's some grand conspiracy that games are fixed, that games are rigged, because frankly, I don't think the NFL is competent enough to pull that off. But I do know this. In the age of legalized gambling, exactly what Roger Goodell feared, because there are quotes, and we'll use them from time to time, from 10, 15 years ago, where Goodell says, if you legalize gambling, normal incidents of the game will be viewed with skepticism, of point shaving and game fixing, and we don't want legalized gambling because we don't want that on us. So you could have someone out there with the tinfoil hat, and it doesn't require a whole lot of tinfoil, who looks at that. And Nick's right, because Dan Orlovsky had the video earlier this week showing all the times that the Kadarius Toney was offside. Why do you not call it every time? Why do you wait until the moment where the game is kind of on the line, 2-minute drive? Why does that draw a flag? Is someone lying in wait for the opportunity to derail the effort to win the game? I don't know. And I don't believe that to be the case. But when you have that kind of inconsistency, that's the problem, Dan, inconsistency. And I've been arguing they need to tear down the officiating function and embrace technology. One of the points I made yesterday, they've had a laser beam first down line for 10 years that they've been trying to get the NFL's attention on. You put a laser beam out there that shows the first down. Put a beam out there that shows the line of scrimmage. Why does it have to be a guessing game? Why is it a mystery as to whether or not a guy's lined up right? Put the line on the field if you can. We're not watching football to make sure that all the players line up properly before the play starts. We want to see what happens after the play starts. Give them a chance to line up properly if there's a technological way to do it. That would solve all this, because then he would have been flagged the first time he did it, and it would have been a non-issue by the time the end of the game came around.
What are the Raiders going to do at head coach?
Well, I think to answer that question, we need to go back to what they didn't do 2 years ago when Rich Bisaccia was the interim coach after Jon Gruden left, took them to the playoffs, almost beat the Bengals, who went on to the Super Bowl that year. And it was as if Mark Davis gave no thought whatsoever to keeping Rich Bisaccia. So this time around, not that they're a playoff team, but when you look at what Antonio Pierce is doing, the fire he brings to the job, the intensity, he's like the perfect Raiders coach. And to set the franchise record in points scored 4 days after getting shut out, they're not quitting. They're not giving up. They're not folding the tents. He's found a way. See, this is why we're talking about Brandon Staley being fired and Antonio Pierce being hired. Lost season. It's over. It's done. You're playing out the string, and you're risking injury along the way. Antonio Pierce found a way to push the buttons on his guys to get them to show up and play their asses off, and Brandon Staley didn't. And I think that is, coupled with the fact that Mark Davis got it wrong 2 years ago in not keeping Rich Bisaccia, that might make him think now, you know what, I'm not going to do this twice. I'll do a short-term contract, but I want to give this guy a chance from the beginning of the offseason all the way through to the end of the season to see what he can do.
If Jon Gruden wins his lawsuit against the NFL, is there a chance he could coach the Raiders again?
Well, I mean, in theory, there's a chance he could coach any team again. Any team could hire him anytime they want.
But the Raiders are paying him, aren't they?
Well, they worked out a settlement of his remaining contract back when he walked away. And that lawsuit, Dan, it is moving slowly. It's been 2+ years. January 11, there's going to be a hearing before the Nevada Supreme Court on the simple question of whether or not the league can pull the case into arbitration. They always want to bring the case into arbitration because they control it. It's all secret, and they're more likely to win. They never want anything to be in open court. They don't want their dirty laundry to be aired out. We still haven't even resolved that question, though. We are over 2 years into the case, and we won't have an answer until maybe May as to whether or not it goes forward in court or before the court of Roger Goodell. So it's going to be a while until this is resolved. And I think the ship has sailed on Jon Gruden coaching in the NFL. But if there was anybody that was going to hire him, it's going to be Mark Davis.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't rule out Mark Davis sticking his finger in the eye of the league and taking the PR hit. It's been over 2 years. Because the whole reason, it was all PR driven. He didn't do anything now. It was emails he sent that were horribly improper from 2011 timeframe that came to light, and something had to happen. 2 years later, what kind of groundswell against it will there be if Mark Davis decides to float that out there? So I wouldn't rule it out, because there's nothing prohibiting him from doing it if he's willing to be the pariah in the eyes of the NFL. But he kind of already is. So what harm is done by bringing Gruden back? I don't think it would happen, but you can't take it off the table.